Hello, my name's Emily. I'm an artist and jewellery maker. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is my most favourite video to film of the year, and it's my favourite art supplies that I've used throughout the year. There will be swatching, there will be lots of discussion on why I enjoy using them and what I've used them for. It's going to be a long one. Get yourself a hot beverage and a nice snack, and let's enjoy talking about some wonderful art supplies. So I thought I'd try and make my life a hell of a lot easier by writing down everything from my watercolours to acrylic paints and stuff all on these cards. Some of these papers are different depending on what medium I'm swatching, so I'll let you know what papers those are. But I just thought it'd make it a lot easier while my brain is not currently functioning as well as it should. We've had a bit of grief in our family. So I'm not in the right headspace at the minute. So I'm trying to make life as easy as possible. So I thought a session of swatching some of my favourite products would be the perfect antidote to a little bit of bereavement. And yes, so if I sound a little bit glummer, that would be why. I did film this originally the other day and I just sounded so flat, and I just thought I don't sound like I'm even enjoying using any of these products. These don't sound like favourites at all, whereas now I feel like I'm in a bit more of a better headspace, so I thought I would definitely. So now I'm in a bit more of a kind of stable headspace, shall we say. So I thought it'd be a bit easier to swatch them today. I am also going to apologise for the state of my fingers. Again, I take out all of my anxieties and stresses on my fingers, so there's been lots of ripping skin and nibbling, so please ignore those. But onto the swatching. So I'm going to start off with the watercolours because everyone loves watercolours. The videos, when I swatched this the other day, there were some gorgeous granulations, so very satisfying, so I thought I would show you those. The papers I'm going to be swatching on are my favourite papers of the year. They're both from Arte. Arte is probably my favourite place to get surface supplies from. I really like the paper. They are inexpensive, but you get a lot of paper for your money. So for example, 25 sheets, I think this cost me £5, and it's really good paper for sketching, just all-purpose sort of paper. And with it being heavyweight, it's like cartridge paper, but it's just that little bit more of a thicker paper. It just feels a bit more substantial. And then I really love the watercolour paper. There's cold pressed and hot pressed. You get 50 sheets. I think it's around £15, but I normally always get them when they're on offer. They do A3 as well, which I also really like. These are the papers I'm going to be swatching on. Anything more wet media, we'll be swatching on this, but I will try and specify that. There's a bit more texture and grain on this paper with it being cold pressed, and it's really, really nice to swatch things like watercolours on. But anything that's a bit more sort of dry media, like pencils and pens, I will be swatching with this. I'm also a little bit breathless, so I apologise if there's any deeper breathing. My pot is being a little bit dramatic at the minute, so I'm a little bit breathless, so bear with me in that. I'm going to be swatching these watercolours with the first brushes I'm going to be talking about as well, which are the Artway brushes. I got these for Christmas from my mother. There's also a larger brush as well, which is this one. I don't use this one as much because it's slightly larger, but when I am doing bigger pieces on my A3 paper, this is fantastic to get a really good wash. They are the sort of quill-like brushes that you can get, and they are stunning, really, really absorbent of the water. They pack the pigment really nicely as well. They blend beautifully. They wash really, really nicely as well. Everything like still stays relatively pointed and tapered. It's beautiful. I really, really like these. So the first watercolours I'm going to be swatching are from Schminke. Let me just grab my water for swatching and a casual guinea pig coaster. You know me and guinea pigs, we have piggies. My mother met them yesterday and they are absolutely gorgeous. They loved grandma and she loved her grandpigs. So I've got two tubes, which are the Glacier Green and the Forest Grey. I popped them on this ceramic dish because it's just a lot easier to swatch. Another tip for those with dexterity issues like myself, get yourself a dinky jar opener because the smallest one gets into these absolutely perfectly and you can really open them so much easier. And they also work with the Winsor & Newton paint, which I also struggle with because they're sort of angular and hexagonal, so they really hurt my hands and I haven't got the grip to really easily open them. But these also work with them as well. They are just fantastic. So I think I got this on either Amazon or eBay just get a slightly smaller size, because even the smaller size will get to those tubes. But if you struggle with your grip or strength in your hands to be able to open tubes like this, fantastic. We're going to first of all swatch the Shire Yellow, which is a very unique shade. It's not one I am most used to using in terms of the tone in watercolours. I tend to use my green gold because this is it's a little bit more of a muted, like khaki yellow. It has got the most gorgeous, almost lavender granulation, and I've not seen anything like that, and I find it so gorgeous for botanical pieces or leaves, landscapes. It's a very neutral yellow sort of shade, but it just has such a unique granulation that I just reach for it very often. I bought the half pan originally because I didn't think I'd use much of it, so I thought I'll just try this one out. But I would be considering to get the 15ml bottle in the end because I've used it so much. You can see very much touching the pan here. But I just love it. It's probably one of my favourites that I've reached for the most this year, really. And it's one of the newer ones that I've had. I'm then going to swatch the Desert Green, which is almost like a very neutral terra vert, slightly deeper terra vert shade. Then it has an element of like viridian in it, and then it has this gorgeous almost carmine granulation, which I think is so unique. And I think the thing that I like the most about like especially these Schminke watercolours is the uniqueness of it. I don't tend to like to spend a lot of money on like quite expensive supplies, but these are something I will justify spending my money on because they just make the experience of painting so therapeutic. Just look at that, how unique that is with all those, it's just beautiful. But I do find they are well worth the money just for how unique they are. They perform so well, they're very reliable because they always perform beautifully. I just really enjoy using them. If I had to sacrifice, say, cheaper brushes or cheaper pens or pencils and I would be able to use these, that's what I would do because they are just so delightful to use. The next shade is one that you're probably familiar with me mentioning on my channel, and it's the Glacier Green, again by Schminke. It's like a cobalt turquoise with a potter's pink granulation. It's so special. I love using this for like window scenes or glass. It's quite a neutral cobalt turquoise, so it's not too in your face. I like to add almost more vibrant turquoises over the top of this, but as a base for say glacier surfaces or water scenes, this shade just works gorgeous. The next shade is Forest Grey, which is again one I purchased somewhat blindly, but they had an offer on and it was the last one that I thought would be useful to have in my collection because I've not got one similar, and it has been one that I've reached for very frequently. It's got a cool tone grey base and then it almost granulates a warm sienna shade. It has kind of a burnt sienna within there as well, so it is like quite a warm grey. It has a slight olive tone as well, so it can work quite similar to like a neutral green, very neutral green. In terms of the most frequently used granulating paints, these are it this year. They're just stunning. I will let those do their magic while I swatch the other ones, but then when all the other ones have finished as well, and they've dried, I'll show you them again, because it's always nice to see them when they're dry with all the effects, but it does take a little bit longer for them to dry because I do like to apply them quite wetly. So the next shades that I will be swatching are from Roman Szmal. These are full pans. These are a lot more inexpensive, but still the quality is absolutely stunning. And this is my most used green, I think, for all of my paintings this year. If I've used a green watercolour, I think this has been the one I've used. Oh, you can see how much I've used. There's quite a healthy dip in there, shall we say. It's a very true, almost dark sap green with a hint of olive. It's not too blue toned, it's not got much viridian in it until it starts to granulate more. The granulations are a bit more subtle because they're not quite so contrasting colours. They're still very much the green granulations, but it is a very unique paint. And one, if I had to choose just one green watercolour for the rest of my life, I think this would be it, because it just works for everything that I need. You can deepen it up to almost like a perylene sort of green value to then really water it down to a really soft light green as well. It's just a really versatile green paint. I really enjoy using it. And the Przybysz grey is a really unique, it's like a lilac-y neutral tint, whereas neutral tint definitely has more of a warmth to it. This has got more of like a lavender, greyer tone. You'll see when I swatch it. Definitely got some purple, some violet in there. But then it has like, it's like a purple Payne's grey, kind of with a neutral tint vibe to it. But it's one I really enjoy for like, I don't tend to like to use a lot of black in my paintings. I like to try and use other colours if I can, and then I tend to use black as a pencil to really get the more precise depth. I don't want too much darkness in there in certain pieces. Certain pieces obviously warrant that, but I quite like experimenting with getting depth and value with actual colours rather than black itself. I think black can almost be too intense sometimes with certain pieces, but sometimes it's necessary, and when it is, I like to use a pencil. This is beautiful, and you can see how well this cold pressed paper works with these granulating paints as well. The next paint I will be swatching. The next paint I'll be swatching is from Daniel Smith, and it's another very well used shade this year. Very versatile to everything that I like to paint from portraits. This works really well for like a milky ivory tone as a really nice highlight for the skin, while remaining relatively neutral, not quite so cool as say a grey, but it's still got a nice creaminess to it. It also works really well for like a highlight in flowers that you want it to be more, like less sort of stark as say white. Having something like this just really makes it more neutral, a bit softer, but you can really blend it out and it's really quite special. It's not overly granulating, it does have a bit of texture in it when it dries, but it's not one that really separates much. You can really get a nice cream finish to it. I really enjoy this paint. It works quite well with the Sennelier Warm Grey, which is like a touch cooler than this, but they work really beautifully together. I like using them together, but this one's probably one I used a bit more this year. We then have a handmade watercolour that I adore this brand. It's one that I have bought quite a few from. They are from an Etsy shop called Beyond Indigo UK. And the quality of these paints are probably the most gorgeous handmade paints I have ever used. I've used a few, but these are by far my favourite. The colour range is so beautiful. There's a lot of more pastel shades, some neutral shades. There's a shade that I also really enjoy using but haven't used as much, called Putty. It's like a perfect shade for a portrait. It's like a mauve, like a more purple based Caput Morton, but it's stunning. It's got a slight gouache creaminess when built up, but then they do sheer out beautifully with water as well. And I've loved doing these as like bases for portraits. They just are stunning. They perform so beautifully. She even sent me a bonus unreleased shade called Pacific, which I think is now released in the shop, and it's absolutely stunning. And again, pay for them with my own money. It's not sponsored, but I will link the shop below because it is, you know, an absolute delight the paints are to use. So happy with them. And as you'll see, as that starts to work its magic, it's stunning. Another shade you're probably very familiar with on my YouTube channel is the Old Holland Brilliant Pink. It's probably my most used pink watercolour. You can see just how well loved it is. Probably do with getting another one at some point. It's again quite an opaque gouache-like consistency, but you can sheer it out as well. It's one colour that I like to gravitate to a lot. It's one colour as well that I have in a lot of different mediums, like but it's quite similar to say light magenta from Holbein and Gouache, to maybe slightly cooler Venetian Rose, Amsterdam acrylic paints. But it is just lovely to use. Sorry, I'm a bit shaky. And the final shade is a Maimeri Blue shade, which again was just a shade I was missing in my palette. I purchased this one because I believe it was on sale. It was slightly cheaper, but I really like the consistency of this. It's quite, you can really build it up. It starts off quite sheer, but I like to really get in there with a lot of pigment. But you can really use it as a really light wash as well. But it's a very user-friendly paint. I think it's not gonna, you can't really overdo this paint, which I really like. It's like it's got a slight ochre hint to it, but it's very much an umber. It's got like a coolness to it, but there is just a slight element of like mustardy ochre. It's quite transparent. I feel like the binder's quite thick within this, but not in a negative way. It just makes it a little bit more user-friendly in the sense of you can't, it's not overly opaque, you can't go in there too dark, it shears out beautifully, but it is very, very nice. What I'm going to do now is let these dry, and I'll show you these when they have dried, because the granulations are just absolutely stunning, but they do need a bit of time to work their magic. So I'll pop those to one side and I'll show you those in a bit. I have some brushes I want to show you as well, but they're more suitable for like blending acrylics, so I might use a brush that's not necessarily a standout brush, but it's a shape that I often use. It's a Filbert. The one that I might show you is quite new to me, but I do really enjoy using it. I've been really getting into the Pro Art Masterstroke brushes. This is a Filbert number 4. I just like how good quality they are. They feel really nice to use. They feel sturdily kind of manufactured or put together. They feel sturdily assembled. I don't feel like they are, I feel like even though they are a slightly more expensive brush than what I'm used to, and you buy them separately, they are well worth the money. They're not overly expensive to the point of feels like you need to donate a kidney to be able to pay for them, but it's still a lovely quality brush that I do find enhances the painting experience when I use them. So I'm now going to be discussing the Holbein gouaches and then the toner gouaches that I've been enjoying using. There's a lot of neutral tones, but I've also been very much reaching for the warmer tones in gouaches. I've noticed that there's quite a theme, less blues than usual. I've been more towards the neutral tones in portraits, so that's probably reflected within my colour choices this year. So let's start with Misty Green, which I really like using for portraits as a base. So I'll tend to do a lot of undertone base painting first. So I'll tend to use like a misty green and misty blue on the areas that are a bit more kind of veiny, especially for like very pale complexions. But I also really like using these for eyes as highlights, because sometimes the white can be a bit too intense straight away, and I don't want to dot the white too soon. So I tend to do that as like almost the final step in that respect. But these are great as kind of like this is kind of where I think I want the highlight to go. Pop it here, and if I'm not too fussed about it, I can blend it out and into the other shade. It's not going to be too noticeable, but it's a bit more forgiving in that respect. This is Misty Green. It's like a really pale sage. It's quite similar to the shade that I've painted in the bedroom of our bungalow. There's like a little feature wall, and it's quite similar to this shade. Kind of scalloped the edging. Maybe that's why I've reached for it subconsciously, because it provides me with a bit of comfort and joy. But it is very good for portrait underpainting, like getting those undertones in before going on with the sort of more neutral skin-like tones. And then with the eyes, it's lovely as well. But you can blend it out. This brush as well is delightful. Then going to swatch Misty Blue, which is very much used in a similar way as Misty Green, but this tends to be more for paler shades. This is a great way of getting an olive complexion underneath a skin tone, whereas if you've got a very sort of pinker undertone complexion that you'd like to do, this is great. It kind of looks a bit more veiny, so it really does get that sort of cool English rose fairness through without being too intense. I do really like it. It's also lovely for like sky. It's very much not like a blue sky, but not quite like a cloudy sky, almost like an overcast sky. But it's very calming. It's the sort of colour that when I need a bit of zen, I feel like I need. Colours are quite symbolic for me. I have synesthesia, so a lot of colours feel a bit different for me. Colours have moods and themes and all sorts, so it's quite a strong tie to colours that I have in my life because of the impact it has on my senses. certain emotions have colours, and this definitely feels like a calm colour for me. Both of these are quite calm colours. For art, it does really aid me in my art in that respect as well. I think it's quite unique quality, and I do have such quite a close relationship with colour. It definitely has helped as a creative over hindered. This is Shell Pink. I'm currently working on a painting where I used Shell Pink and Jaune Brilliant as a background with pinstripes, like horizontal stripes, and it looks beautiful together. This is also a lovely, calm, sort of peaceful, tranquil, innocent pink, which I also really like using. It's the pink that I would use if I wanted to keep things relatively neutral, not too vibrant. But then the pink that I'm going to be swatching next, light magenta, is like a joyful pink to me. It's when I really want to kind of add a bit of punch, personality, quirk, bit of vibrancy. I tend to use this, but it's still quite milky, which I also quite like. But because of that, it's not too garish, so it works well with other colours. You can kind of go a bit more garish with other colours. It's not going to be competing with other colours, but it still definitely packs more of a punch than, say, Shell Pink in my paintings. I do really love this colour. It's like the perfect strawberry ice cream, strawberry milkshake colour. My most perfect pastel pink, in my opinion. And this brush works so well with gouache. If you're in the market for good gouache friendly brushes, Pro Art, Masterstroke brushes, specifically Filbert, I like a Filbert shape. I just find it quite user friendly with my shaky hands. The next shade I'm going to be swatching is Jaune Brilliant, which is probably one of my most favourite shades of the Holbein gouache collection. I really do enjoy this colour so much. It's like a perfect creamsicle orange, peachy shade. It works well with blues. I love using this with like an ultramarine, but then also this with an aqua, even like a mint green. This with a nice lemon yellow. It's just one of my favourites. I think it's such a lovely shade. All of these colours together make a lovely palette. It's making me think of a painting I could do. I mean, I'm using these two in a painting currently. I'll see if I can pop it up on the screen, what I'm doing currently. It's like a pomegranate surrealism piece. I do love me some surrealism, and I'm trying to get back into certain aspects of art that's just for me, that I enjoy doing on a night when my partner's at, say, a pool match or something. I can then paint for my little soul, and surrealism definitely does that. It makes my little weird little brain very happy. The more bizarre that I can make a painting, the happier I am. I like not making any sense in my paintings. I like having no rules in that respect. If I want to make a woman cry pomegranate seeds, so be it. This is Vermilion. It's like a really, it's my perfect vermilion. I bought a vermilion paint from, I think, the Amsterdam collection in acrylic. It was just a bit too orange, a bit too tangerine-y for me. I want my vermilion to be very, almost red, but slightly more orange. Another great vermilion is by Schminke, not the super granulating, just the regular Schminke watercolours. And their vermilion is perfect as well in the watercolours. But I'm quite fussy with my vermilions. This is perfect. I like it really vivid, really warm, slightly on the cusp of orange, but more red. And that's me sorted in terms of the vermilion. We then have my Turner gouaches, which I also very much enjoy. Different consistency to the Holbein. I'd say Holbein are a bit more sort of viscous, a bit more liquidy. These definitely have a bit more of a firmer texture and can have a bit of separation with the binder, but I'm quite happy to just kind of mix them like this beforehand, and they seem to work quite well. So this is Pastel Sand, a little bit like a buff titanium, maybe slightly more ivory. But I do really like this paint. It's very good for, I really quite like using this as like a background colour for, say, a vintagey piece, almost to get the element of the sort of parchment. It works quite well, but it's not too cool toned, not too warm toned. It's just a really neutral sandy beige, so it works really well for a background. There's no competition with what I want to paint. The subject matter always works beautifully with this underneath. it's very smooth in its consistency, so it won't bulk up or texture too much. We then have Permanent Yellow, which I'm really fond of. It's neither too warm, but it's not too lemony either. It just works an absolute treat. I like it a lot. I wouldn't say it's transparent, but it's not too opaque. You can build it up or sheer it out quite well. Within that, it's quite versatile, very user-friendly, but I like having the options of them both in that respect. I think they do a transparent version, maybe. I'm not too sure, but it just is a very creamy yellow in consistency. So with that, it makes it very easy to use, either super opaque like I'm doing now, but then you can sheer it out as almost like a glow. I think I did like a firefly painting and used this with quite a bit of water and then built it up in opacity around the centre, and it just worked beautifully. We then have Grayish Red, which is a perfect portrait colour for contours. It's that slightly more like a Perylene Maroon, Mars Violet type colour. It does have an element of coolness with the greyish, but I think the greyish purple is just that little bit too cool, almost great for zombie skin, shall we say, when I'm doing my horror paintings. But this one is lovely for really getting like the contours around the eyes, anything that you want kind of hidden within like shadow. This works well with it being that red tone and then blending into more skin colours. It works beautifully. And an array of different complexion colours as well. I find this kind of is a perfect, if you like portraits and doing male portraits, female portraits of all different ethnicities, this colour is perfect for, and it's so versatile with what you can do it with. It works beautifully with eye colours, even like the tear ducts and hair even. It just is such a standout shade, and I've not found one in another brand that works in a similar way. Finally, we have Olive Green, probably my most used green gouache. I think even more than the sap green from Holbein. I think this is my most used green. I adore it. The texture's perfect. The tone is just like lush, slightly kind of murky, but then it's got that really sort of warm, botanical feel to it. I just absolutely love it. Like mossy, but not to a point of it being too mustard. Not too dark, not too warm. It's just delicious. Kind of reminds me of mulched spinach in a paint, in the best way. I'm not trying to put you off. I have two very pro spinach piggies who adore it. They'd eat it all the time if they could, but you can't have too much spinach as a piggy. But when they have it, they are very happy. Happy little pigs. You can probably hear them actually. They are quite chatty this morning. I mean, I'm in the art studio, but the door's open, so if you can hear little squeaks, that will be Lottie and Gwenny. But those are the acrylic gouaches. With the acrylic polymer in there, they don't re-wet, so all of these colours, now they are dry, I could layer over the top watercolours and that won't disrupt, whereas the traditional gouache will disrupt and watercolours will disrupt because they don't have that acrylic in them. These, once they're dry, set beautifully. So that with that respect, if you're a mixed media artist, which I am, I really enjoy using these because I can just layer on top of layers on top of layers on top of layers. It's just very, very mess free. I don't feel like there's going to be anything muddy or mixing in a fashion that might hinder the overall desired effect, but this works very well. We're going to have a bit of a break from paints and going to swatch some pencils and neo pastels now. These are my Caran D'ache favourites. There are some Neocolor IIs and some Caran D'ache Luminances that I would like to discuss. So we'll do the Neocolors first and then the Luminances. So we'll do the Neocolors first and then the... start there. We'll do the Neocolors first and then the Luminances. The first one that I've enjoyed the most is the Sahara Yellow. I really like this in portraits. Again, it makes things look really warm and illuminated, lit from within, that sort of aspect. It blends beautifully with water as well. I find this is quite forgiving. If I kind of over highlight, I can then kind of mix it with a bit of water. It tones it down a little bit, kind of layers it a little bit under a bit more. It's perfect. The next shade is a great way, again, adding even more luminance, but in, say, more botanical pieces, and it's golden yellow. This is probably one of my favourites. I'm quite scared if this starts to split or break, because quite a few of mine now have done that, but I really love this one. And with it being the Aquarelle, it also is water soluble. I believe all of these are water soluble that I'm mentioning. I'll double check though. And then have, oh, this one isn't the Acryl, that's my mistake. This one is a Neocolor I, and it's in the lemon yellow, but it's quite a zingy yellow, almost a bit more limey, but the other one's lime green, so what can you say? But this is great. I believe I used this as well with that firefly painting I was talking about, to add a bit more of like a neon twist. You can see I also have used it with a olive green because we have some overlap. My apologies. I probably could have done with sharpening these beforehand, but alas, I did not. We then have the lime green. The last two are the Aquarelle. That was my mistake to not have that one as an Aquarelle. That one is the Neocolor I, so it isn't water soluble, but it's great for layering and it won't disrupt with colour. It's more like a wax pastel that you could do wax resist with, for example. This is lime green. It's like a really springy, minty sort of colour, but it definitely has that sort of citrus element to it as well. Meadows and plants peeking from the soil, very pretty. And then if I want a pop of blue in my paintings or drawings as like a highlight, this is great as well if you're using this for kind of definition to make things look more white. So if, say for example, I had like a white teacup I wanted to paint, I would use this kind of as a shadow, and it actually, by using this, would make the teacup look a bit more white, because you've got that as a shadow. It kind of gives an element of perspective and value in a painting without actually using white. It keeps things very much on a spectrum of what's the lightest and what's the darkest without using a colour per se. That would work quite well. We then have my Caran D'ache luminances that have been my most favourite. I've been doing quite a lot of portraits, like I've said, but I've also tried to do a bit more sort of limited colour palette sort of work. So some of these colours I've been using within that, so some paler shades, been using that as a highlight to kind of replace white, and then some colours, instead of outlining with a darker colour, I've been using like a navy or something that's slightly more of a colour than, say, a definite dark colour. But then some of these have always been very portrait heavy, because I do love a portrait. So we'll start off with French Grey 10%. I feel like this is like a cooler version of, say, the Raw Umber 10% or the Sepia 10%, but it definitely still has an element of warmth than a truer grey. It's great for, again, paler complexions, adding that sort of shadow and contour without it looking too sickly. But that coolness and depth works quite well, especially under the eyes, or in eye colours especially as well. We then have Buff Titanium, which is probably my favourite highlight shade, even probably more than white. It's a bit more noticeable as, say, a colour. It's quite opaque, but it is just delightful. And these pencils are slightly more, say, powdery, pastel-esque pencils. So they layer gorgeously. They layer over like a waxier consistency a lot better than, say, the opposite. I like using these more like final layers before I highlight, because if I've got something that I'd like to refine, say for example there's a shape within a nose that I want to really kind of sharpen or get the highlight a bit more sort of buffed, this works quite well at going over well-worked areas already without kind of disrupting the paper more. It's not quite so sort of waxy, like I said, not as oil-based, definitely has that sort of pastel pencil-esque, but not, obviously it's not a pastel pencil. I think it's the light fastness, and the pigment's just really rich in this. We then have pink white, which if, say, buff titanium is a bit too ivory for me, or I want something a bit more cooler, this works quite well, but I will use it in the same sort of way. It's also beautiful for like a really innocent sort of highlight in a flower, or even just as like little tiny details over, like say Pastel Sand, Turner Gouache. Having this kind of over the top can add like a really nice texture or point of interest within the background without it competing with anything else in the main sort of composition. We then have brown ochre, 10%. Oh, we haven't sharpened you. I don't know where my sharpener has gone, so we'll attempt it with this, and this is the 10% version, so it's one of the more paler versions of brown ochre. I don't know if I have the other brown ochres, so I really like this. A really lovely mid-tone sand beige. I do really like it. Very opaque as well, you can see, but then you can really buff and blend it out really nicely as well. And this paper that I'm swatching on is that heavyweight cartridge, so it works really well with dry media. I think you can use it with wet media as well, but it does buckle a little bit more. But it's beautiful. I then have, I'm going to try and pronounce this as best I can, Herculanum Red. And I like using this for more, I hate the word, fleshier areas, like say the tear duct or even the lips, or as like a blush colour on a complexion, or if the complexion is a bit warmer, you can use this to really kind of get a bit of colour to the face without it being too sort of opera rose vibrant pink. But it's one of my newer colours to my collection, but I have definitely enjoyed using it. I love it. It's more of a neutral version of the next shade that I'm going to swatch, but I'm head over heels in love with, and this is Anthraquinoid Pink, and it's very similar to that brilliant pink. It's maybe slightly more coral, slightly redder and warmer, but it's just, I love this pink. I do like watching other people swatch materials. Maybe a swatch book in like one of my little filofaxes would be quite useful. It would make it very useful if I was shopping for supplies. I'd know what I've actually bought. If it's something that you would like to watch, I wouldn't mind filming it, because I do want to do that as a personal project. But if it's something that you'd like to see as well, do let me know. The colour I'm swatching at the minute is Carmine Lake. I love this colour. It's like a really deep berry burgundy. Again, a great replacement for black, slightly warmer, maybe a bit magenta-y purple. But I really like using this instead of black because it's a bit sort of gentler on a piece, but still definitely defines enough. You can get really quite a deep colour, but it's absolutely gorgeous. Another colour I like to use in replacement of a black, and I've recently done a painting on my channel, you might have seen, it's the bathroom painting, and I used this in that painting and I really enjoyed it. It's like an ultramarine, but imagine like a rich sort of almost royal depiction of ultramarine. It reminds me of how in Victorian times or even Tudor times blues were kind of used as like royalty, and this is just that sort of colour that I can imagine is a very royal, regal, maybe even pious. And this is added at a later date, but I realised I have used this quite a lot as well, and it's Hibiscus Pink. It's a newer shade, but for the latter part of the year I have used this so much because it's like a really soft mauvey lavender shade, and in floral pieces, or even like as like a lip colour on a portrait, or just a really soft gentle shade, very calming. And then you can build it up and it makes a really nice pinky mauve, then as like a wash and blended with other colours. It's just a really good shade that just adds that sort of wash of not quite warmth, but a bit of colour, but not colour that's kind of going to make it too garish. And again, like these layer and you can really get them super opaque. Again, a supply that's definitely on the pricier side, but definitely worth the price with the quality that you get for it. It's stunning, so creamy. It's like therapeutic in itself just using them. Beautiful. They do get a bit powdery, but they do blow away quite easily. but do be careful because sometimes you can get some bits and you can get a bit of mess, but you have been warned. But I don't mind it too much. I don't mind a bit of mess when it comes to art. Those are my Caran D'ache favourites. Stick with the pencils. We have my favourite black, which no matter what black that I use, I always seem to go back to this one because it's just the perfect consistency, the perfect sort of final colour. Because it's a bit waxy, the Faber-Castell polychromos are a bit waxy, a bit more oil based, I think, or along those sort of lines, definitely that sort of texture. And I just find nothing disrupts over this. It's like a great final piece, a great final material to really get the last bits of depth that you want. I tend to do this for like eyelashes or the pupils on the eyes, any outlines that I want to go over from the colour that I just want to be really deep and dark. I just think this is the best black. I just love it. It's so rich and buttery, but then you can blend it out really nicely as well, and it gets a really sort of nice buff. Really get a great gradient with this. I do rate the polychromos. They stood the test of time through my tattooing to portraiture, even making designs up now. I still go for like a lot of the greens and the colours. They're great for sketching, great for layering. I just really like them. But that's the black polychrome. I have loads of it. I think I have one in every room in case I need one. On to the Derwent Lightfasts now, I believe. I did have a tiny one as well somewhere. I'll try and find it. I've been using this as like my pot for pencils. It's like a little roughly sort of pot. I got it from a charity shop. It's absolutely adorable. So I've been keeping quite a lot of my favourite products I want to mention. So when I'm trying to film this video, I don't have to then think, what did I use and what did I like? I've got them all here because if I've not slept, that brain ain't gonna work, unfortunately. Oh, I don't think I've added the last shade in the end. Bear with me a moment. We made a mistake. I'm so sorry. Typically it's a long nail I'm trying to add. I have done my best to make that fit in, but yes, it's not going to totally fit the aesthetic, but we'll work with it. The first Derwent Lightfast I'd like to discuss, which is very similar, very comparable to the Caran D'ache Luminance. I would say in terms of like the oil-based, creamier pencils, I'd say the polychromos and the Derwent drawings are probably the creamiest. I then would say next would be the Derwent Lightfast, and then I'd say Caran D'ache Luminance. So from like a really nice creamy oil-based, shiny, almost slick pencil crayon, to then the powdery pastel, really blendable pencils. You've got the opposite end, which would be the Caran D'ache Luminance. The Derwent Lightfast, I believe, are somewhere in between, maybe slightly drier, but not in a negative way, just slightly more sort of blendable in that respect. And I think the Lightfast quality must have something to do with that. This is Sandstone. It's a really lovely pale terracotta shade. It just adds any warmth to a painting or a drawing. I really like it. These also blend beautifully. And then have Ruby Earth. I actually have just gotten rid of my teeny tiny one. I couldn't even sharpen it anymore because it wouldn't fit in the sharpener and buff it. I need to get these pencil extenders, to be fair, because that would be very useful. But this is my last Ruby Earth. Once this one's gone, I will need to purchase another. I think this is it's probably my most used pencil actually, even though I definitely think I use the Caran D'ache Luminances more in terms of as a range, but I definitely think this is my most used pencil of all. It's quite similar to that Gouache from Turner, the Grayish Red. Maybe slightly pinker, slightly lighter, but it's just perfect for a lot of sort of rosier tones in a painting, from florals to even certain like architecture. It's quite good for like a brick colour as well, like a shadow in a brick. Even layering over the top, it works quite well. We then have Dyke Brown, which is a really cool toned. I believe this Dyke Brown from Derwent definitely has like an umbery tone, which I really like. It's not quite as dark as some of the Van Dyke Browns that I've used, which I really like, because I've got like a chocolate in a drawing pencil, which is quite dark and slightly warmer, a bit more sepia in tone. Whereas this has got a bit of a greyish tone to it, but I really like that. It's great for like a mid-tone within hair. You can really lighten it and buff it out, but then it also really builds in opacity. So I'd say these are a bit more buildable. I think you can go a bit more opaque with the Caran D'ache Luminances a bit quicker, but you can still go probably just as opaque, but it does have that ability to build it up slowly, which I quite like. I think that's because it's that in-between sort of texture, not too dry but not too creamy. And then we have Racing Green, probably the darkest green that I use, which is probably why I use it the most. I really like a dark green outline in leaves, just to really get that sort of shape. And I just whistled with my teeth, I do apologise, I hate that noise. Misophonia. But this is like a really gorgeous dark, almost ivy green, maybe a bit cypressy, but it's so rich. I love it. So using this as like backgrounds and blending it into tones within a florist. I'm actually working on a piece in my sketchbook of some tomato plants. I need to remember to use this in the background because I've got some black acrylic and watercolours as like a base, but I think that over the top will make a really nice texture over those paint strokes. And then we have my teeny tiny champagne, and it's quite similar to, say, the Caran D'ache buff titanium, and then mixed with a bit of that sort of burnt ochre. It's got a bit of a Naples yellow tone to it, which I really like. I couldn't not include this because I did add it to my pot, so I must have definitely wanted to talk about it, but typically it's a very long name, single word long name, but trying to add it on that was a little bit tricky, but we managed, we saved it. It's all good. We then have the final pencil crayons that I'd like to discuss, which are my Derwent drawing pencils, which I adore. And the first one is a light sienna. It's like a peachy, fleshy sort of colour. Kind of reminds me of like, well, it actually reminds me of my guinea pig's little paws, which sounds really sweet, because they are really sweet little paws. Very cute. I say one of them, the other one's all brown, so her paws are a little bit deeper, but Gwenny's got two little front white paws, so this is the sort of colour of her skin underneath, and it's very cute. And little ears as well. It's a great sort of fur complexion as well for paler animals, like pets, more like domestic animals. Be a great highlight for like a orange tabby cat as well, because it's got that slightly peachy warmth to it. The next shade is Pale Cedar, which is a gorgeous, it reminds me of Misty Green from Holbein, but in pencil form. Maybe slightly warmer in tone, and maybe a little bit deeper, but it's like a nice murky green, great for highlights. It's great for actually adding like a thundery aspect to like a sky, you know, when you can smell the earth, that sort of petrichor smell. This is a great pencil to add that to, but it works beautifully to add that sort of thundery aspect to a sky. We then have Chocolate, which is probably the darkest brown pencil that I own, which is probably why I use it so much. It's super dense in pigment, super rich, definitely very sepia, super blendable as well, so I can really get that opacity but then really blend it into like a softer, well, that's just the grain of the table, I do apologise. I'm trying to show you that it's super soft in blendability. My pencil is interrupting with the grain of the table. My apologies, but it's gorgeous. And then we have Solway Blue, which is definitely more like a blue-grey, which I really enjoy using. Again, it definitely adds to more like an icier sky, a wintry sky, misty blue in a pencil crayon, like that's the Misty Green, the Pale Cedar. These two definitely match those colours from Holbein. If you're wanting like a pencil to layer over the top of those, these two work well for those misty colours from Holbein. but that's those. I'll see if those watercolours dry and I'll show you those now as well. Are the watercolours. You can see they are absolutely gorgeous in granulation. So special. Next things I'm going to swatch, and I believe the last things I'm going to swatch, other than maybe some pens, are my acrylic paints. I'm also going to show you these brushes with the acrylic paints as well, so do bear with me. I'm going to swatch them all on here first, then I'd like to show you the different effects on this plain piece of paper. This is both the cold press paper as well. The pencils were swatched on that cartridge paper because it's a bit smoother, but it's also a bit thinner, which is why you could see the table through it, which is not ideal. I will swatch the brushes and show you the different effects of that with these, but onto the swatching first. Start with the Amsterdam acrylics because that's at the top. I'm going to swatch using this Royal & Langnickel soft grip brush. This is like a slightly firmer and denser mop filbert brush. I'll use these to swatch so you can see them all within this paintbrush. It's quite good at like blending the edges, but it does pack on a nice thick layer of colour as well, and then I'll go over the other effect brushes afterwards. So we'll start off with the Amsterdam Naples Yellow Greenish, which works really well for undertones in a portrait. It makes it a little bit murkier, but I really like that. I tend to use this underneath over it being over the top or in like a really sheer way, but this is lovely. It's a really nice colour. Maybe this wasn't the best brush to use because it's super absorbent. Taken quite a bit of that colour up with it, so probably should have wet it first. That's my error. The next shade I'm going to show you is the Venetian Rose, which is a gorgeous corally pink. I use this probably the most in floral pieces, but it's also a fantastic blush shade for a portrait. I've also been enjoying using this as like the knuckles of hands to make things look a little bit more sort of textured and worn, getting a lot of different sort of vibrancies within anatomy. I think it works super well. How gorgeous is that colour? It's like the most perfect sort of creamy pink with a very warm undertone, quite corally. And the next colour I'm going to choose is Grayish Blue. I recently did a painting for my mother of like a Cumbrian landscape, and I used this in the sky as like a bit of a pop of colour, and it's again a really nice way of adding, like, it's like a pastel Payne's grey, I'd say this is, and mixing it with a Payne's grey is really nice as well. But this one is very creamy. Again, I love the opacity of these Amsterdam acrylics. They're so creamy. Like, I used one of the yellows recently, and I'm so used to having quite a sheer yellow from the Galleria, which works well when I want a sheer yellow, but sometimes I just need it to pack a bit more of a punch. And I used one of the Amsterdam yellows that I purchased in my latest haul, and I was just so impressed. It was an absolute joy to use. I think it was just the primary yellow, but I would have included it in this favourite, but I think that was the first time I used it properly, and as gorgeous as it was, I've not used it frequently enough to mention it as a favourite, so I'm trying to keep it as sort of valid in that respect, but it did definitely stand out. Beautiful. It's like a... I'm now going to swatch my Winsor & Newton Gallerias, which are very greeny, neutral heavy, but I think that's where this collection works its best, really. They have some gorgeous greeny colours that, with the consistency of those paints, it's just wonderful, and they're very relatively inexpensive. That to have multiple convenience colours in that sort of neutral aspect when I do a lot of those paintings just works so well. The only problem I have with these tubes is they're an absolute nightmare to open with my difficult dexterity issues, so I do use these this opener, which is so much easier. The first shade I'm going to swatch is Naples Yellow. You can see how much I've used. This was a new tube, I think around beginning oh no, probably end of last year, I think I bought this. And I've used it very frequently. It's like it's definitely a deeper Naples yellow for sure. Definitely has like an ochre hue to it, but I really, really like it. I find it's just one of those colours that I reach for, not necessarily because it's a Naples yellow, but because the colour that I know is going to come out the tube is just what I'm looking for many different reasons. It works for florals, it works for portraits, it works for landscapes, it's sandy, it's peachy, it's neutral, it just works for a lot of various reasons. A very good staple colour in that respect. The next colour I'm going to swatch is Pale Lemon, which is kind of more of a Naples yellow that I would assume to be more Naples yellow. It's slightly more cooler, a little bit more of an icier, citrusy yellow. A really sort of pastel, creamy yellow. Almost like a cream sort of shade. It's a great mix of shades if you're wanting things to be a bit paler but not quite so sort of insipid as say white. This works quite well, especially for like greens and yellows. Using this to make things paler without going quite so bright as say a white. This works very well. Another sheerer shade I'm going to be swatching is the Green Gold. Again, I predominantly use this as a mixer because as a standalone shade it is quite sheer. Definitely not their best shade, but I've not found anything quite to replace it within my price range. It is very pretty, but it is also super, super sheer. I don't know whether I might have necessarily got a bad one. If you've had this and you also find it sheer, do let me know. But it is great. It's kind of adding a wash of this sort of colour. It is also a lot sheerer, but it's just that sort of murky, mustardy yellow green that I just adore. I love these sort of colours. They remind me of autumn and they just add that sort of almost cosy warmth to a painting. Now probably my most favourite green acrylic paint would be the Winsor & Newton Hooker's Green. The Amsterdam Sap Green is quite nice. Maybe a little bit too Farlow for me. So I do like having this one as well because it's a bit more of a neutral green. It's not too sort of olive, not too viridian. It's like almost like a deep sap green. Works perfectly for like a really lush foliagey green. I do like these Galleria paints. They're a lot more inexpensive than some of the paints that you can get. But they just work so well, and because they are more inexpensive you can get them more convenience colours and mix your perfect shades in that respect. And they layer lovely. While they aren't necessarily the most opaque paints, they do layer so you can build and build and build, which I quite like, that sort of building up on canvases. I did that recently for my mum's canvas and it was really delightful to do, to really build that colour up and take my time. And as someone who isn't a very patient person, I don't normally do that. But next paint, this is a brand new one actually, because I finished mine entirely and I couldn't get any more out. I tried to chop the tube out and literally dry. So this is my newest one. It's Payne's Grey, my most favourite paint I think in the Galleria line. I think I've been through maybe 3 tubes now. Is this my 4th or 3rd? Probably is towards my 4th actually. I use it so much. I like using it as underpainting to get that sort of gothic feel. I like using it as a mixer instead of black for a bit of a cooler tone without it being black. It's like, imagine if navy just had a slightly more neutral, darker tone. Absolutely perfect. I want to actually start making some little ornaments, tiny portraits or tiny paintings in. I've made these little frames, so I want to then kind of get a backing piece for, so I can make some little ornaments with tiny originals in to maybe sell on markets when I'm well enough to do markets again. And anything that I don't sell could maybe go on Etsy. Last Galleria shade that I'm going to swatch is the Raw Umber, which is a really unique shade. Oh, sorry, Pale Umber, not Raw Umber. I've written Raw Umber there, it's Pale Umber. But it is like it reminds me of like a milky hot chocolate colour, slightly more purpley. It's very milky in a brown, like a really milky brown shade, with just a hint of lilac. I've got a bit of Payne's grey in there, so just ignore that, please. But that's the raw umber. This again is a really opaque. I think the pastel paints are more opaque. I don't know whether it's because there's more white, and it just makes it sort of a bit more smoother in consistency and makes it a bit more opaque, but it's a lovely shade. I really like it. Final acrylic paints are my Vallejo artist colours. We have Mars Violet and Teal. I was saying that I like an element of neutral in my acrylic paints, but this is quite hypocritical of me to say because this is vibrant. This one packs a punch. The texture's quite thick, but I think that's quite good because you don't use nearly as much. Although these are also extremely difficult to open, which is why these are so useful. Look at that. It's just bonkers pigment. And it's so smooth. I love the colour. It's like a really warm turquoise, maybe slightly more beryl green, but on a really sort of vibrant scale. It does sheer out, you can see quite nicely. It's like a little wash. And then I'm going to swatch my last one, which is Mars Violet. It's slightly browner than, say, a Mars Violet that I'm after, but it can mix with the raw umber to make it a little bit more purpley. But as far as a Mars Violet, I definitely would say it's a bit more of a burnt sienna Mars Violet, but it is still great for portraits. And again, the creaminess of these paints is delightful. Super, like, thick in consistency. You can really get them out beautifully. Very satisfying. I always feel very much like a real artist when I use these paints, with the sort of vintage-esque aluminium tin tubes and the thick sort of paint. Those are my acrylic paints. And I think the last things I'm going to swatch are my acrylic markers. Speaking of acrylics, they are my Posca markers, which I very much enjoy. And these are probably my most used colours, which are quite boring for me. I normally use the lilacs and the aquas, but genuinely, these are the ones I've been using the most. I think it's because I've been doing a lot more neutral portraits or landscapes. I've not been doing my big vibrant botanical pieces as of yet. Well, not this year as much anyway. The first one I'm going to swatch is my Uni Posca pen in the 1M like bullet shape. It's very thin and it's in black and it's very fine. I do find it can sort of spit a little bit when I do, if I kind of, it can add a little bit of a spit. I think this one's actually could do with a bit of a, oh, there we go. But it is very dark, very inky. You can build up the colour nicely, but then it does have a very fine tip. And you can do lots of little mark makings, which I really like. Quite good for cross hatching, but then when it does do that weird spitty thing, which it's not doing now because I have asked it to, and it's not. But when I'm doing a nice canvas and I want it to stay nice and neat, then it'll decide to spit. Such is life. Then I have the ivory in the 3M. I love this ivory and beige combo that I'm doing recently. I find it really, it's just a lot gentler than, say, a white. I think highlighting it, I think I've just done a bit of black in there as well, so my apologies if that looks a little bit murky. I do find the tips do tend to eat up the paper a bit more when it's got a bit more texture. So I tend to use these on smoother, sometimes Bristol board, maybe hot press if I can get away with it, because otherwise if I use cold press it does tend to bunch up a little bit. Maybe I'm just a bit heavy-handed, but if I kind of go a bit lighter in hand it doesn't do it as much. But then I have the beige, slightly pinker, but again a really fantastic colour, great for portraits. I use this one quite a lot. I do like that in that one direction, it seems to work quite well, but I tend to use these on canvases more than paper. I do use these in the Royal Canon sketchbooks, but because that paper is quite smooth as well, it doesn't tend to do that either. But I then use the English Green, which I'm so happy that they now do these as singles, because I didn't like the idea of having to buy the whole darker Posca marker sets again, just for the English Green and the ochre. So I managed to get these in a single version, which I'm thrilled to bits with. And these are 5M, so these are a bit thicker. And this one's quite juicy because it's relatively new. And then this is my most used yellow in acrylic marker, and this is straw yellow, and it's really warm. Again, that sort of golden tone that I really like. Just makes me happy. Those are my most used acrylic markers. I'm going to show you the acrylic paint and the brushes that I've been wanting to tell you about. So lots of different textures. They've been very useful for acrylic, so I thought I'd show you with the same colour paint what each brush does and how it looks, because I think that's the best way to show you why I love them so much. So what paint do we use? I think I'm going to use a teal. Everyone loves a teal, don't they? So if I blob a bit on a piece of paper, I can show you how that works with each individual brush. Look at that. It almost looks impasto, sort of thick gel-like consistency. Beautiful. Right, I'll start off with these. I think these are like coarser hair, maybe doe foot. They're definitely a lot coarser anyway, and that sort of angled shape here you can see. So I'll show you how this one looks. It's great for adding texture, but then you can really buff it in because of that coarser tone. It does make it a little bit more sort of textured for that sort of natural earthier texture, that green. I also have the same texture brushes in the smaller style. I don't think these would work as well for, say, complexion pieces, because they do have that sort of coarser feel, that texture, unless that's what you want. Although I suppose the stippling effect might work quite well, like the teeny tiny one. Maybe this one might work more for like eye shape with that taper there. Might work quite well for like that sort of blown out eyeshadow effect. That would work quite well actually. Or even like the shadow of the lashes. That'd work quite well if I did like a shadow underneath of the lashes to make it look more like that sort of heavy doe-eyed look. That would look quite good. I've been using this more for like shadows of trees to really get those branches nice and fine, but eyes, that would be good. I'm then going to use my Pro Art brushes. This is the Terry Harrison Special Effects. This is a comber. I do have a slightly narrower comber from Royal Langnickel as well. I use both of these for hair. Anything that requires sort of those fine lines within. I don't use too much on the brush, but it does work really nicely. Or if I get a little bit of a thicker, you can kind of looks quite cool. I predominantly use this for hair, so I've not used this with blue paint before. Maybe I should do blue hair for a painting. Then the thinner one works in a similar way. I think it's slightly stiffer in its kind of brush layout. And because it's slightly thinner, it does have a bit more control and precision. I'd also say this slightly has a bit more coarser hair. This definitely feels like a smoother synthetic tackle-on. Whereas this is kind of almost between that sort of oil brush goat hair feel, but then also I think it is synthetic. It does have a different feel to it. The Pro Art ones I like to discuss are my teeny tiny Filberts and my fine liner brush that I've been using for detail pieces. So this is my Filbert, that's the 0. So I believe they're all done in sizes, and that's the 0 size. I just like how precise they are with them being a Filbert. You can really get into each individual corner and kind of taper it in nicely, and I have quite a lot of control with it to really get a nice sharp line. But then you can almost like buff it out as well. Very versatile brush, I believe. And then the fine liner, not the finest one that I have, but I find I use this one the most because I can get into each tiny tapered little corner, but then it's big enough as well to do a bit of the work for me easily when trying to pack it on a bit thicker. I can do that with this same brush, but then really sort of almost twist that sort of end to make it nice and tapered. Really, really fine. And then finally I have my Royal & Langnickel mop brushes, which are so useful for blending a really nice sort of shape, quite rounded and fluffy, a nice not too coarse texture but not too soft either. I really like this one for that reason, and they just buff so nicely and so like smoothly as well. You can really get that sort of almost airbrushed edge to it. It's just beautiful. You have to be a bit patient with it, but the effect is always worth it in my opinion. I am just not the most patient person, but you can really buff out the colour and really get a nice smooth blend. And this one does exactly the same, it's just a little bit smaller. So I'll show you that here. It's just so pretty. You can really get a really nice blown out effect. The last things I want to discuss are just some pens I've been enjoying for journaling and some jewellery making supplies. They're just not my life, that's why it was being a bit weird. But these are some pens I've been enjoying for journaling. I thought I'd mention them quickly because I do love my journaling. I find it very therapeutic in the same way that art does. One things that I've found that are relatively inexpensive but they're so useful are these Hobbycraft almost handwriting pens. They've got like a plastic nib and they do work very, very well. I don't know if they're archival, but for journaling in like a really sort of looser way, they work really well. So if I write these down, a slightly more spennier brand are the Sakura. I love the Micron PNs, which are again a plastic nib. That's what PN stands for. These tend to last a little bit longer than say these handwriting pens, but they have archival ink, so they won't fade. So they're great for like if I was doing journaling that I wanted to kind of look back on in years to go. They won't fade. They're waterproof as well, so they work great for a base and then adding watercolours over the top. These work fantastic for as well. And then these are the graphic ones, which is, I believe this one's the one. You can get the chisel tips as well. but again, they're quite a rounded, almost bullet tip, but they're great for like a bolder effect, but still great for handwriting as well. One thing I've gotten into this year as well have been gel pens, for a way of them lasting longer in terms of like the nibs not necessarily getting blunt, because these are like a metal tip nib. I also like the fact that these are retractable, and these are the Pentel Energels. I like that you can get them all in different colours as well. So I have, my most used colours are these neutral ones because I like journaling in relatively neutral colours. So we have the black, the sepia and the brown. And I really like those. They add a bit of interest into my journaling pages, and they're very reliable in the sense they're not going to blunt halfway through. I don't find that they skip or struggle with any of the pigment flow. Another Pentel brush I've enjoyed. This is mainly for like shadows around photos that I add into my journals or stickers that I want to kind of highlight a bit further, and these are the Brush Sign pigment pens, and I like the grey one. It's just a little bit more. I do have the black and the sepia as well, which I do enjoy, but I think the grey one's the one I've used the most because it is great for like a shadow. What I like with this is that I'll then go over the top and kind of make it almost like a drop shadow. So it really stands out nicely in the journals. It doesn't bleed, it doesn't disrupt the way that the journal will look. But it definitely adds more of an interesting effect in my journals without layering like pens that will just disrupt on the other side. I do really like this effect that they give me, and that grey is almost the perfect for a drop shadow because it's not too light that it doesn't become visible as a drop shadow, and it's dark enough to still stand out without it also blending into the black too much. So I really like that. Those are the pens that I've chosen to discuss as standout pens, as it were. Jewellery supplies, because I am a polymer clay artist, probably the most as my job, I suppose. I sell probably the most jewellery as anything. I think the polymer clay I've probably enjoyed using the most because I actually found them again. They were out of stock for ages everywhere I tried, but I managed to find my neon colours because I mix a lot of my own colours. In fact, I'll show you. A lot of my colours I will mix myself. For example, my greens in a pot here. And my blues, some of them I use quite a lot of the colours that are almost pre-mixed, but a lot of my pinks I find can be quite pale if I use them without anything of the neon, and this really makes the vibrancy come through. If I wanted to be a bit more cooler toned, I use this neon yellow. If I wanted to be a bit more warmer and almost purpley, this works beautifully, a bit more blue toned. These work so well as mixers. I don't tend to use them as like the pure pigment colours, but as mixers they work so well, and because I use them as mixers they last ages. So I bought 2 of each of these and they should last me a little bit longer. The last ones that I purchased lasted me a fair while as well, so I don't have to use too much of those. I then found some hoop cutters, not cutters, some hoop I suppose templates that you can then wrap your clay around to make the hoops, and these have been so useful. I predominantly was just using like little cookie cutter circles. I wouldn't bake these because they are plastic, and as I learned the hard way, if you use these in the oven when the clay is raw, they melt. I mean, I can still use this one, but they melt. So I wouldn't use these in the oven. That was my mistake, and I didn't realise that you couldn't do that. So these ones I just use as the raw clay. Then I will pop them off the guide and then bake them. But I've made quite a lot of hoop earrings recently, and I've been providing me with an immense amount of joy. So I thought I'd show you some of my favourites. I've been working through my collections. So we have the Stargazer Lilium collection. And these are the hoops. And then we have the strawberry and the vintage, got sort of ceramic-esque effect. I then have these, which are quite an old pair. I did these before I had a template, but they're not too bad considering. And these are my Venus flytrap ones, which I adore. They make quite the statement. And then I've been doing my artist hoops. So I have my Van Gogh sunflowers and my Salvador Dali. But my most recent ones, which they might have gone up on Instagram, not necessarily on Etsy, are my Monet Parasol Lady hoops. I've then really enjoyed making stamps out of clay, and I just sold a pair of sunflower stamps which have been so cute, made me realise how much I enjoyed them myself. And I used the clay, is it clay and clay or clay and clay cutter for the stamps. They're super sturdy, they're slightly tapered so they make cutting really easy, and you can really hold them quite nicely. They're not going to slide out your hand and cause disrupted and wasted clay. And then I made these calla lily stamps, which make me so happy. I love the colours. I think they really stand out with the navies and the yellows. Also from Cali and Clay are these floral cutters. So I have a little daisy, I have like a blossom and another blossom. So I've enjoyed those as cutters. And I've also really enjoyed mica powder. I've discovered mica powder recently over the Christmas period because I thought, how can I make it extra sparkly and zingy? Well, mica powder, obviously. So I've been using this silvery white, and that's what this looks like. It's super, super shiny. So I made these sort of quirky, wavy design for Christmas with a little snowball pom-pom. And I use that silvery white as like a, I'm trying to see if you can really see how shiny and sparkly that is. Super pearlescent and pretty. And then for the gold, if you can see, because they're still teeny tiny, I made some teeny presents. And the mica powder made the gold ribbon, oh, super, super shiny. I've also made some other gold earrings for Christmas, which are super shiny. And I've been using the gold mica powder here. I believe I got these from Amazon for Christmas. And they are super, super dainty and cute. I've also been developing my skills in other aspects. So I've been using my handmade crochet hooks, shameless plug. These are also available on my Etsy. I've been making my first ever crochet garment. I'll put a picture here. And I made my first waistcoat and I absolutely love it. I wore it yesterday when I went to the garden centre with my mother. And I just felt very proud of my skill developing. I'm not doing anything with it to sell. I'm just enjoying making myself some little crochet clothes, and it provides me with an immense amount of joy. I can do it in bed when I'm really tired and can't do much else. Don't have to look at a screen. I can just crochet my little heart away and it makes me happy. But that is the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video or like me, please subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you here and join on all of my arty endeavours. And goodness me, there are many. I'm so, so grateful for you to watch all this video. And if you've made it all this way, you are an absolute trooper. I didn't know I could ramble on for that long about art supplies, but there you go. As I have said before, all of my products that I've mentioned in this video are linked below. Anything with an asterisk is a affiliate link, so if you do purchase through that link I will gain a small commission, which I can then use to put back into this channel with more art supplies and potentially another art supply haul, because we all love that. So if you do shop through those affiliate links, I'm so grateful, thank you so much. And I'm also eternally grateful for you to be able to be coming back to this channel and watching my videos, or if it's your first time and you're spending, well, an hour and a half with me talking about art supplies, I'm also massively grateful for you to spend that time with me. I can't thank you enough. Making these arty videos fills my days with purpose, and I'm so, so grateful to everyone who shops on my Etsy shop and follows me on Instagram and interacts with me. I'm so, so grateful. I would love to know what your favourite art supplies are of the year. So in the comments, let me know what you've been really enjoying using in 2024. It may influence me in another art haul, but all of my links are in the description box below, from my Etsy shop to my arty Instagram to also my personal Instagram. If you're interested in guinea pigs, books and sparkly makeup, then that's also there. But I have taken up enough of your time now. I'm going to go. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you have a truly magical rest of your day. Please stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.